Stop. Do you have your kit? In Chapter 7, a small box of pills is more powerful than a diplomat's passport. John Lloyd Stephens has just become the most important man in Gualán, simply because he has a medicine chest. Before we dispense the next dose, do the ritual. Hit subscribe, smash that like button, and join the inner circle. And let me know your station in the comments. I want to see the global squad in full force today. We're diving into the Apothecary's gamble. Stephens is treating everything from rheumatism to systemic fevers using 19th century logic. As a biology student, I find the therapeutic diplomacy here fascinating. He isn't just curing people. He's buying safety and information with every dose of quinine. It's raw, it's risky, and it's the only medicine they've got. Volume up. The clinic is open. The expedition continues. Now.
Chapter 7.
That night there was no rain, and the next day, as the ground was somewhat dry, we commenced a regular survey of the ruins. It was my first essay in engineering. Our surveying apparatus was not very extensive. We had a good surveying compass, and the rest consisted of a reel of tape which Mr. C. had used in a survey of the ruins of Thebes and Jerusalem. My part of the business was very scientific. I had to direct the Indians in cutting straight lines through the woods, make Bruno and Francisco stick their hats on poles to mark the stations, and measure up to them. The second day, we were thoroughly in the spirit of it. That day Don Jose Maria refused to execute the contract. Don Gregorio was the cause. He had ceased to interfere with us, but at the idea of our actually taking root in the neighborhood, he could not contain himself, and persuaded Don Jose Maria that he would get into difficulty by having anything to do with us. He even told him that General Casquera's passport was worthless, and that General Casquera himself had gone over to Morazan. He carried his point for the moment, but in the end we beat him, and a fortnight afterwards Mr. Catherwood paid to purchase money and completed the contract. After 3 days of very hard but very interesting labor, we finished the survey, the particulars of which I intend to inflict upon the reader, but before doing so, I will mention a little that was previously known of these ruins. Huarros, the historian of Guatemala, says, Francisco de Fuentes, who wrote the Chronicles of the Kingdom of Guatemala, assures us that in his time, that is, in the year 1700, the Great Circus of Copan still remained entire. This was a circular space surrounded by stone pyramids about 6 yards high, and very well constructed. At the bases of these pyramids were figures, both male and female, of very excellent sculpture, which then retained the colors they had been painted with. And what was not less remarkable, the whole of them were habited in the Castilian costume. In the middle of this area, elevated above a flight of steps, was a place of sacrifice. The same author affirms that at a short distance from the circus there was a portal constructed of stone, on the columns of which were figures of men, likewise represented in Spanish habits, with hose and ruff around the neck, sword, cap, and short cloak. On entering the gateway there are 2 fine stone pyramids, moderately large and lofty, from which is suspended a hammock that contains 2 human figures, one of each sex, clothed in the Indian style. Astonishment is forcibly excited on viewing this structure, because large as it is, there is no appearance of component parts being joined together, and though entirely of one stone and of an enormous weight, it may be put in motion by the slightest impulse of the hand. From this time, that is, from the year 1700, there is no account of these ruins until a visit of Colonel Galindo in 1836, before referred to, who examined them under a commission from the Central American government, and whose communications on the subject were published in the Proceedings of the Royal Geographical Society of Paris and in the Literary Gazette of London. He is the only man in that country who has given any attention at all to the subject of antiquities, or was ever presented Copan to the consideration of Europe and our own country. Not being an artist, his account is necessarily unsatisfactory and imperfect, but it is not exaggerated. Indeed, it falls short of the marvelous account given by Fuentes 135 years before, and makes no mention of the movable stone hammock with the sitting figures, which were our great inducement to visit the ruins. No plans or drawings have ever been published, nor anything that can give even an idea of that valley of romance and wonder, where, as has been remarked, the genii who attended on King Solomon seem to have been the artists. It lies in the district of country now known as the state of Honduras, one of the most fertile valleys in Central America, and to this day famed for the superiority of its tobacco. Mr. Catherwood made several attempts to determine the longitude, but the artificial horizon which we took with us expressly for such purposes had become deranged, and, like the barometer, was useless. The ruins are on the left bank of the Copan as you ascend, which river empties into the Motagua, and so passes into the Bay of Honduras near Omoa, distant perhaps 200 miles from the sea. The Copan River is not navigable, even for canoes, except for a short time in the rainy season. Falls interrupt its course before it empties into the Motagua. Cortez, in his terrible journey from Mexico to Honduras, are the hardships of which even now, when the country is comparatively open and free from masses of enemies, it is difficult to form a conception, must have passed within 2 days' march of the city. The extent along the river, as ascertained by monuments still found, is more than 2 miles. There is one monument on the opposite side of the river, at the distance of a mile, on the top of a mountain 2,000 feet high. Whether the city ever crossed a river and extended to that monument, it is impossible to say. I believe not. At the rear is an unexplored forest, in which there may be ruins. There are no remains of palaces or private buildings, and the principal part is that which stands on the bank of the river, and may, perhaps, with propriety be called a temple.
This temple is an oblong enclosure. The front or river wall extends in a right line north and south 624 feet. And is from 60 to 90 feet in height. It is made of cut stones, from 3 to 6 feet in length and 1.5 feet in breadth. In many places the stones have been thrown down by bushes growing out of the crevices, and in one place there is a small opening, from which the ruins are sometimes called by the Indians Las Ventanas, or the windows. The other 3 sides consist of ranges of steps and pyramidal structures, rising from 30 to 140 feet in height on the slope. The whole line of survey is 2,866 feet, which, though gigantic and extraordinary for a ruined structure of the Aborigines, that the reader's imagination may not mislead him, I consider it necessary to say, is not so large as the base of the Great Pyramid of Gizeh. The engraving opposite gives the plan according to our survey, a reference to which will assist the reader to understand the description. To begin on the right, near the southwest corner of the river wall and the south wall is a recess, which was probably once occupied by a colossal monument fronting the water, no part of which is now visible. It may have fallen and been broken, and the fragments buried or washed away by the floods of the rainy season. Beyond are the remains of 2 small pyramidal structures, to the largest of which is attached a wall running along the right bank of the river. This appears to have been one of the principal walls of the city, and between the 2 pyramids there seems to have been a gateway or principal entrance from the water. The south wall runs at right angles to the river, beginning with a range of steps about 30 feet high, and each step about 18 inches square. At the southeast corner is a massive pyramidal structure, 120 feet high on the slope. On the right are other remains of terraces and pyramidal buildings, and here also was probably a gateway by a passage about 20 feet wide, into a quadrangular area 250 feet square, two sides of which are massive pyramids, 120 feet high on the slope. At the foot of these structures and in different parts of the quadrangular area are numerous remains of sculpture. At the point marked E, see the plan, is a colossal monument richly sculptured, fallen and ruined. Behind it fragments of sculpture, thrown from their places by trees, are strewed and lying loose on the side of the pyramid from the base to the top. And among them our attention was forcibly arrested by rows of death's heads of gigantic proportions, still standing in their places about halfway up the side of the pyramid. The effect was extraordinary. The engraving which follows represents one of them. At the time of our visit, we had no doubt that these were death's heads, but it has been suggested that the drawing is more like the skull of a monkey than that of a man. And, in connection with this remark, I add what attracted our attention, though not so forcibly at the time. Among the fragments on this side were the remains of a colossal ape or baboon, strongly resembling in outline and appearance one of the four monstrous animals which once stood in front attached to the base of the obelisk of Luxor, now in Paris. 1. And which, under the name of cynocephaly, were worshipped at Thebes. This fragment was about 6 feet high. The head was wanting. The trunk lay on the side of the pyramid, and we rolled it down several steps, when it fell among a mass of stones, from which we could not disengage it. We had no such idea at the time, but it is not absurd to suppose the sculptured skulls to be intended for the heads of monkeys, and that these animals were worshipped as deities by the people who built Copan. Among the fragments lying on the ground near this place is a remarkable portrait, of which the following engraving is a representation. It is probably the portrait of some king, chieftain, or sage. The mouth is injured and part of the ornament over the wreath that crowns the head. The expression is noble and severe, and the whole character shows a close imitation of nature. At the point marked D stands one of the columns or idols, which give the peculiar character to the ruins of Copan, to the front of which I particularly request the attention of the reader. It stands with its face to the east, about 6 feet from the base of the pyramidal wall. It is 13 feet in height, 4 feet in front and 3 deep, sculptured on all 4 of its sides from the base to the top, and one of the richest and most elaborate specimens in the whole extent of the ruins. Originally it was painted, the marks of red color being still distinctly visible. Before it, at a distance of about 8 feet, is a large block of sculptured stone, which the Indians call an altar. The subject in the front is a full-length figure, the face wanting beard and of a feminine cast, though the dress seems that of a man. On the 2 sides are rows of hieroglyphics, which probably recite the history of this mysterious personage. As the monuments speak for themselves, it is unnecessary to give any verbal description, and there being so many to present to the reader, all differing very greatly in detail, it will be impossible, within reasonable limits, to present our own speculations as to their character. It need only be remarked that from the beginning, our great object and effort was to procure true copies of the originals, adding nothing for effect as pictures. All the outlines were made with the camera lucida, and the minute parts afterwards filled in with the pencil.
Following the wall, at the place marked C, is another monument or idol of the same size, and in many respects similar. The engraving number 9, represents the back. The character of this image, as it stands at the foot of the pyramidal wall, with masses of fallen stone resting against its base, is grand, and it would be difficult to exceed the richness of the ornament and sharpness of the sculpture. This, too, was painted, and the red color is still distinctly visible. The whole quadrangle is overgrown with trees and interspersed with fragments of fine sculpture, particularly on the east side. At the northeast corner is a narrow passage, which was probably a third gateway. On the right is a confused range of terraces, running off into the forest, ornamented with death's heads, some of which are still in position, and others lying about as they have fallen or been thrown down. Turning northward, the range on the left hand continues a high, massive pyramidal structure, with trees growing out of it to the very top. At a short distance is a detached pyramid, tolerably perfect, marked on the plan Z, about 50 feet square and 30 feet high. The range continues for a distance of about 400 feet, decreasing somewhat in height, and along this there are but few remains of sculpture. The range of structures turns at right angles to the left and runs to the river, joining the other extremity of the wall, at which we began our survey. The bank was elevated about 30 feet above the river, and had been protected by a wall of stone, most of which has fallen down. Among the fragments lying on the ground on this side is the portrait given on the next page. The plan was complicated, and the whole ground being overgrown with trees, difficult to make out. There was no entire pyramid, but at most 2 or 3 pyramidal sides, and these join on to terraces or other structures of the same kind. Beyond the wall of enclosure were walls, terraces, and pyramidal elevations, running off into the forest, which sometimes confused us. Probably the whole was not erected at the same time, but additions were made and statues erected by different kings, or, perhaps, in commemoration of important events in the history of the city. Along the whole line were ranges of steps with pyramidal elevations, probably crowned on the top with buildings or altars now ruined. All these steps and the pyramidal sides were painted, and the reader may imagine the effect when the whole country was clear of forest, and priests and people were ascending from the outside of the terraces, and thence to the holy places within to pay their adoration in the temple. Within this enclosure are 2 rectangular courtyards, having ranges of steps ascending to terraces. The area of each is about 40 feet above the river. Of the larger and most distant from the river, the steps have all fallen and constitute mere mounds. On one side, at the foot of the pyramidal wall, is the monument or idol marked B, of which the engraving number 11 represents the front. It is about the same height with the others, but differs in shape, being larger at the top than below. Its appearance and character are tasteful and pleasing, but the sculpture is in much lower relief. The expression of the hands is good, though somewhat formal. The back and sides are covered with hieroglyphics. Near this, at the point marked A, is a remarkable altar, which perhaps presents as curious a subject of speculation as any monument in Copan. The altars, like the idols, are all monolithic or of a single block of stone. In general, they are not so richly ornamented and are more faded and worn or covered with moss. Some were completely buried, and of others it was difficult to make out more than the form. All differed in fashion, and doubtless had some distinct and peculiar reference to the idols before which they stood. This stands on 4 globes cut out of the same stone. The sculpture is in bas-relief, and it is the only specimen of that kind of sculpture found at Copan, all the rest being in bold alto relievo. It is 6 feet square and 4 feet high, and the top is divided into 36 tablets of hieroglyphics, which beyond doubt record some event in the history of the mysterious people who once inhabited the city. The lines are still distinctly visible, and a faithful copy appears in the following cut. The engravings, numbers 13, 14, exhibit the 4 sides of this altar. Each side represents 4 individuals. On the west side are the 2 principal personages, chiefs or warriors, with their faces opposite each other, and apparently engaged in argument or negotiation. The others are divided into 2 equal parties, and seem to be following their leaders. Each of the 2 principal figures is seated cross-legged, in the Oriental fashion, on a hieroglyphic which probably designates his name and office or character, and on 3 of which the serpent forms part. Between the 2 principal personages is a remarkable cartouche containing 2 hieroglyphics, well preserved, which reminded us strongly of the Egyptian method of giving the names of the kings or heroes in whose honor monuments were erected. The headdresses are remarkable for a curious and complicated form. The figures have all breastplates, and one of the 2 principal characters holds in his hand an instrument which may, perhaps, be considered a scepter. Each of the others holds an object which can be only a subject for speculation and conjecture. It may be a weapon of war, and if so, it is the only thing of the kind found represented at Copan. In other countries, battle scenes, warriors, and weapons of war are among the most prominent subjects of sculpture, and from the entire absence of them here, there is reason to believe that the people were not warlike but peaceable and easily subdued.
The other courtyard is near the river. By cutting down the trees, we discovered the entrance to be on the north side, by a passage 30 feet wide and about 300 feet long. On the right is a high range of steps rising to the terrace of the river wall. At the foot of this are 6 circular stones from 18 inches to 3 feet in diameter, perhaps once the pedestals of columns or monuments now fallen and buried. On the left side of the passage is a high pyramidal structure, with steps 6 feet high and 9 feet broad, like the side of one of the pyramids at Saqqara, and 122 feet high on the slope. The top is fallen and has 2 immense ceiba trees growing out of it, the roots of which have thrown down the stones and now bind the top of the pyramid. At the end of the passage is the area or courtyard, probably the Great Circus of Fuentes, but which, instead of being circular, is rectangular, 140 feet long and 90 broad, with steps on all the sides. This was probably the most holy place in the temple. Beyond doubt it had been the theater of great events and of imposing religious ceremonies. But what those ceremonies were, or who were the actors in them, or what had brought them to such a fearful close, were mysteries which it was impossible to fathom. There was no idol or altar, nor were there any vestiges of them. On the left, standing alone 2/3 of the way up the steps, is the gigantic head represented in plate number 15. It is moved a little from its place, and a portion of the ornament on one side has been thrown down some distance by the expansion of the trunk of a large tree, as shown by the drawing. The head is about 6 feet high and the style good. Like many of the others, with the great expansion of the eyes, it seems intended to inspire awe. On either side of it, distant about 30 or 40 feet and rather lower down, are other fragments of sculpture of colossal dimensions and good design, and at the foot are 2 colossal heads, turned over and partly buried, well worthy the attention of future travelers and artists. The whole area is overgrown with trees and encumbered with decayed vegetable matter, with fragments of curious sculpture protruding above the surface, which probably, with many others completely buried, would be brought to light by digging. On the opposite side, parallel with the river, is a range of 15 steps to a terrace 12 feet wide, and then 15 steps more to another terrace 20 feet wide, extending to the river wall. On each side of the center of the steps is a mound of ruins, apparently of a circular tower. About halfway up the steps on this side is a pit 5 feet square and 17 feet deep, cased with stone. At the bottom is an opening 2 feet 4 inches high, with a wall 1 foot 9 inches thick, which leads into a chamber 10 feet long, 5 feet 8 inches wide and 4 feet high. At each end is a niche 1 foot 9 inches high, 1 foot 8 inches deep and 2 feet 5 inches long. Colonel Galindo first broke into this sepulchral vault, and found the niches and the ground full of red earthenware dishes and pots, more than 50 of which, he says, were full of human bones packed in lime. Also several sharp-edged and pointed knives of chaya, a small death's head, carved in a fine green stone, its eyes nearly closed, the lower features distorted, and the back symmetrically perforated by holes, the whole of exquisite workmanship. Immediately above the pit which leads to this vault is a passage leading through the terrace to the river wall, from which, as before mentioned, the ruins are sometimes called Las Ventanas, or the windows. It is 1 foot 11 inches at the bottom and 1 foot at the top in this form, and barely large enough for a man to crawl through on his face. There were no remains of buildings. In regard to the stone hammock mentioned by Fuentes, and which, in fact, was our great inducement to visit these ruins, we made special inquiry and search, but saw nothing of it. Colonel Galindo does not mention it. Still, it may have existed and may be there still, broken and buried. The Padre of Gualán told us that he had seen it, and in our inquiries among the Indians, we met with one who told us that he had heard his father say that his father 2 generations back had spoken of such a monument.
I have omitted the particulars of our survey, the difficulty and labor of opening lines through the trees, climbing up the sides of the ruined pyramids, measuring steps, and the aggravation of all these from our want of materials and help and our imperfect knowledge of the language. The people of Copan could not comprehend what we were about, and thought we were practicing some black art to discover hidden treasure. Bruno and Francisco, our principal coadjutors, were completely mystified, and even the monkeys seemed embarrassed and confused. These counterfeit presentment of ourselves aided not a little in keeping alive the strange interest that hung over the place. They had no monkey tricks, but were grave and solemn, as if officiating as the guardians of consecrated ground. In the morning they were quiet, but in the afternoon they came out for a promenade on the tops of the trees, and sometimes, as they looked steadfastly at us, they seemed on the point of asking us why we disturbed the repose of the ruins. I have omitted, too, what aggravated our hardships and disturbed our sentiment: apprehensions from scorpions and bites of mosquitoes and garrapatas or ticks, the latter of which, in spite of precautions, pantaloons tied tight over our boots and coats buttoned close in the throat, got under our clothes and buried themselves in the flesh. At night, moreover, the hut of Don Miguel was alive with fleas, to protect ourselves against which, on the 3rd night of our arrival, we sewed up the sides and one end of our sheets, and thrust ourselves into them as we would into a sack. And while in the way of mentioning our troubles, I may add that during this time the flour of the hacienda gave out, we were cut off from bread and brought down to tortillas. The day after our survey was finished, as a relief, we set out for a walk to the old Stone Quarries of Copan. Very soon we abandoned the path along the river and turned off to the left. The ground was broken, the forest thick, and all the way we had an Indian before us with his machete, cutting down branches and saplings. The range lies about 2 miles north from the river and runs east and west. At the foot of it, we crossed a wild stream. The side of the mountain was overgrown with bushes and trees. The top was bare and commanded a magnificent view of a dense forest, broken only by the winding of the Copan River and the clearings of the haciendas of Don Gregorio and Don Miguel. The city was buried in forest, and entirely hidden from sight. Imagination peopled the quarry with workmen and laid bare the city to their view. Here, as the sculptor worked, he turned to the theater of his glory, as the Greek did to the Acropolis of Athens, and dreamed of immortal fame. Little did he imagine that the time would come when his works would perish, his race be extinct, his city a desolation, an abode for reptiles, for strangers to gaze at, and wonder by what race it had once been inhabited. The stone is of a soft grit. The range extended a long distance, seemingly unconscious that stone enough had been taken from its sides to build a city. How the huge masses were transported over the irregular and broken surface we had crossed, and particularly how one of them was set up on the top of a mountain 2,000 feet high. It was impossible to conjecture. In many places were blocks which had been quarried out and rejected for some defect, and at one spot, midway in a ravine leading toward the river, was a gigantic block, much larger than any we saw in the city, which was probably on its way thither, to be carved and set up as an ornament, when the labors of the workmen were arrested, like the unfinished blocks in the quarries at Assuan and on the Pentelican mountain. It remains as a memorial of baffled human plans. We remained all day on the top of the range. The close forest in which we had been laboring made us feel more sensibly the beauty of the extended view. On the top of the range was a quarry block, with the che stone found among the ruins, and supposed to be the instrument of sculpture. We wrote our names upon it. They stand alone, and few will ever see them. Late in the afternoon we returned, and struck the river above the ruins, near a stone wall with a circular building and a pit, apparently for a reservoir.
As we approached our hut, we saw 2 horses with side saddles tied outside, and heard the cry of a child within. A party had arrived, consisting of an old woman and her daughter, son, and his wife and child, and their visit was to the medicos. We had had so many applications for remedies, our list of patients had increased so rapidly, and we had been so much annoyed every evening with weighing and measuring medicines, that, influenced also by the apprehensions before referred to, we had given out our intention to discontinue practice. But our fame had extended so far, that these people had actually come from beyond San Antonio, more than 30 miles distant, to be cured, and it was hard to send them away without doing something for them. As Mr. C. was the medico in whom the public had most confidence, I scarcely paid any attention to them, unless to observe that they were much more respectable in dress and appearance than any patients we had had, except the members of Don Gregorio's family. But during the evening I was attracted by the tone in which the mother spoke of the daughter, and for the first time noticed in the latter an extreme delicacy of figure and a pretty foot, with a neat shoe and clean stocking. She had a shawl drawn over her head, and on speaking to her she removed the shawl, and turned up a pair of the most soft and dove-like eyes that mine ever met. She was the first of our patients in whom I took any interest, and I could not deny myself the physician's privilege of taking her hand in mine. While she thought we were consulting in regard to her malady, we were speaking of her interesting face. But the interest which we took in her was melancholy and painful, for we felt that she was a delicate flower, born to bloom but for a season, and even at the moment of unfolding its beauties, doomed to die. The reader is aware that our hut had no partition walls. Don Miguel and his wife gave up their bed to 2 of the women. She herself slept on a mat on the ground with the other. Mr. C. slept in his hammock, I on my bed of Indian corn, and Don Miguel and the young men under a shed out of doors. I passed 2 or 3 days more in making the clearings and preparations, and then Mr. Catherwood had occupation for at least a month. When we turned off to visit these ruins, we did not expect to find employment for more than 2 or 3 days, and I did not consider myself at liberty to remain longer. I apprehended a desperate chase after a government, and fearing that among these ruins I might wreck my own political fortunes, and bring reproach upon my political friends, I thought it safer to set out in pursuit. A council was called at the base of an idol at which Mr. C and I were both present. It was resumed in Don Miguel's hut. The subject was discussed in all its bearings. All the excitement in the village had died away. We were alone and undisturbed. Mr. C had under his dominion Bruno and Francisco, Don Miguel his wife, and Bartolo. We were very reluctant to separate, but it was agreed, nem. Con. For me to go on to Guatemala, and for Mr. Catherwood to remain and finish his drawings. Mr. Catherwood did remain, and after many privations and difficulties, was compelled to leave on account of illness. He returned a second time and completed them, and we now give the result of the whole. At a short distance from the temple, within terraced walls, probably once connected with the main building, are the idols, which give the distinctive character to the ruins of Copan. And if the reader will look at the map and follow the line-marked pathway to Don Miguel's house, toward the end on the right he will see the place where they stand. Near as they are, the forest was so dense that one could not be seen from the other. In order to ascertain their juxtaposition, we cut vistas through the trees, and took the bearings and distances, and I introduced them in the order in which they stand. The first is on the left of the pathway at the point marked K. This statue is fallen and the face destroyed. It is 12 feet high, 3 feet 3 inches on one side and 4 feet on the other. The altar is sunk in the earth, and we give no drawing of either. At a distance of 200 feet stands the one marked S. It is 11 feet 8 inches high, 3 feet 4 inches on each side, and stands with its front to the east on a pedestal 6 feet square, the whole resting on a circular stone foundation 16 feet in diameter. Before it, at a distance of 8 feet 10 inches, is an altar, partly buried, 3 feet 3 inches above the ground, 7 feet square, and standing diagonally to the idol. It is in high relief, boldly sculptured, and in a good state of preservation. The engravings which follow, numbers 16 and 17, represent the front and back view. The front, from the absence of a beard and from the dress, we suppose to be the figure of a woman, and the countenance presents traits of individuality, leading to the supposition that it is a portrait. The back is a different subject. The head is in the center, with complicated ornaments over it, the face broken, the border gracefully disposed, and at the foot are tablets of hieroglyphics. The altar is introduced on one side, and consists of 4 large heads strangely grouped together, so as not to be easily made out. It could not be introduced in its proper place without hiding the lower part of the idol. In drawing the front, Mr. Catherwood always stood between the altar and the idol.
A little behind this is the monument marked T, number 18. It is one of the most beautiful in Copan, and in workmanship is equal to the finest Egyptian sculpture. Indeed, it would be impossible, with the best instruments of modern times, to cut stones more perfectly. It stands at the foot of a wall of steps, with only the head and part of the breast rising above the earth. The rest is buried, and probably as perfect as the portion which is now visible. When we first discovered it, it was buried up to the eyes. Arrested by the beauty of the sculpture, and by its solemn and mournful position, we commenced excavating. As the ground was level up to that mark, The excavation was made by loosening the earth with the machete and scooping out with the hands. As we proceeded, the earth formed a wall around and increased the labor. The Indians struck so carelessly with their machetes that, afraid to let them work near the stone, we cleared it with our own hands. It was impossible, however, to continue. The earth was matted together by roots which entwined and bound the monument. It required a complete throwing out of the earth for 10 or 12 feet around, and without proper tools and afraid of injuring the sculpture, we preferred to let it remain, to be excavated by ourselves at some future time, or by some future traveler. Whoever he may be, I almost envy him the satisfaction of doing it. The outline of the trees growing around it is given in the engraving. Toward the south, at a distance of 50 feet, is a mass of fallen sculpture, with an altar marked on the map, and at 90 feet distance is a statue marked Q, number 19, standing with its front to the east, 12 feet high and 3 feet square, on an oblong pedestal 7 feet in front and 6 feet 2 inches on the sides. Before it, at a distance of 8 feet 3 inches, is an altar 5 feet 8 inches long, 3 feet 8 inches broad and 4 feet high. The face of this idol is decidedly that of a man. The beard is of a curious fashion and joined to the mustache and hair. The ears are large, though not resembling nature. The expression is grand, the mouth partly open, and the eyeballs seem starting from the sockets. The intention of the sculptor seems to have been to excite terror. The feet are ornamented with sandals, probably the skins of some wild animals, in the fashion of that day. The back of this monument, number 20, contrasts remarkably with the horrible portrait in front. It has nothing grotesque or pertaining to the rude conceits of Indians, but is noticeable for its extreme grace and beauty. In our daily walks we often stop to gaze at it, and the more we gazed, the more it grew upon us. Others seemed intended to inspire terror, and with their altars before them, sometimes suggested the idea of a blind, bigoted, and superstitious people and sacrifices of human victims. This always left a pleasing impression, and there was a higher interest, for we considered that in its medallion tablets, the people who reared it had published a record of themselves, through which we might one day hold conference with the perished race and unveil the mystery that hung over the city. At a distance of 142 feet in a southeasterly direction is the idol marked P. It stands at the foot of a wall rising in steps to the height of 30 or 40 feet, originally much higher, but the rest fallen and in ruins. Its face is to the north, its height 11 feet 9 inches, the breadth of its sides 3 feet, and the pedestal is 7 feet square. Before it, at a distance of 12 feet, is a colossal altar. It is of good workmanship and has been painted red, though scarcely any vestige of the paint remains, and the surface is time-worn. The two engravings, numbers 21 and 22, represent the front and back view. The former appears to represent the portrait of a king or hero, perhaps erected into a deity. It is judged to be a portrait, from certain marks of individuality in the features, also observable in most of the others, and its sex is ascertained by the beard, as in the Egyptian monuments, though this has a mustache, which is not found in Egyptian portraits. The back of this idol, again, presents an entirely different subject, consisting of tablets, each containing two figures oddly grouped together, ill-formed, in some cases with hideous heads, while in others a natural countenance is preserved. The ornaments, diadems, and dresses are interesting, but what these personages are doing or suffering is impossible to make out. This statue had suffered so much from the action of time and weather that it was not always easy to make out the characters, the light being in all cases very bad, and coming through irregular openings among the branches of trees.
The stone of which all these altars and statues are made is a soft grit stone from the quarries before referred to. At the quarries we observed many blocks with hard flint stones distributed through them, which had been rejected by the workmen after they were quarried out. The back of this monument had contained two. Between the second and third tablets the flint has been picked out, and the sculpture is blurred. The other in the last row but one from the bottom remains untouched. An inference from this is that the sculptor had no instruments with which he could cut so hard a stone, and consequently that iron was unknown. We had, of course, directed our searches and inquiries particularly to this point, but did not find any pieces of iron or other metal, nor could we hear of any having ever been found there. Don Miguel had a collection of che or flint stones, cut in the shape of arrowheads, which he thought, and Don Miguel was no fool, were the instruments employed. They were sufficiently hard to scratch into the stone. Perhaps by men accustomed to the use of them, the whole of these deep relief ornaments might have been scratched, but the che stones themselves looked as if they had been cut by metal. The engraving number 23 represents the altar as it stands before the lost monument. It is 7 feet square and 4 feet high, richly sculptured all around. The front represents a death's head. The top is sculptured and contains grooves, perhaps for the passage of the blood of victims, animal or human, offered in sacrifice. The trees in the engraving give an idea of the forest in which these monuments are buried. At the distance of 120 feet north is the monument marked O number 24, which, unhappily, is fallen and broken. In sculpture it is the same with the beautiful half-buried monument before given, and I repeat it, in workmanship equal to the best remains of Egyptian art. The fallen part was completely bound to the earth by vines and creepers, and before it could be drawn it was necessary to unlace them, and tear the fibers out of the crevices. The paint is very perfect and has preserved the stone, which makes it more to be regretted that it is broken. The altar is buried with the top barely visible, which by excavating we made out to represent the back of a tortoise. The next engravings, numbers 25, 26, 27, exhibit the front, back and one of the sides of the monument N, distant 20 feet from the last. It is 12 feet high, 4 feet on one side, 3 feet 4 inches on the other, and stands on a pedestal 7 feet square with its front to the west. There is no altar visible. Probably it is broken and buried. The front view seems a portrait probably of some deified king or hero. The two ornaments at the top look like the trunks of elephants, an animal unknown in that country. The crocodile's head is 7 feet from it, but appears to have no connection with it. This is 4 feet out of the ground, and is given in the plate as one of the many fragments found among the ruins. The back presents an entirely different subject from the front. At the top is a figure sitting cross-legged, almost buried under an enormous headdress, and 3 of the compartments contain tablets of hieroglyphics. Not to multiply engravings, we have omitted side views as they are in general less interesting. This is particularly beautiful. The tablets of hieroglyphics are very distinct. At a distance of 28 feet in the same direction is the statue marked M, which is fallen and lies on its back with a tree across it nearly lengthwise, leaving visible only the outline, feet and sandals, both of which are well sculptured. The preceding engraving is a representation of it. Opposite is a circular altar with 2 grooves on the top, 3 feet high and 5 feet 6 inches in diameter, an engraving of which is here given. The next three engravings, numbers 30, 31, and 32, are the front, back, and side view of the monument marked L, distance 72 feet north from the last, with its front toward the west, 12 feet high, 3 feet in front, 2 feet 8 inches on the side, and the pedestal is 6 feet square. Before it, at a distance of 11 feet, is an altar very much defaced and buried in the earth. The front view is a portrait. The back is entirely made up of hieroglyphics, and each tablet has 2 hieroglyphics joined together, an arrangement which afterwards we observed occasionally at Palenque. The side presents a single row of hieroglyphics, joined in the same manner. The tablets probably contain the history of the king or hero delineated, and the particular circumstances or actions which constituted his greatness.
We have now given engravings of all the most interesting monuments of Copan, and they may be relied on as accurate and faithful representations. We have purposely abstained from all comment. If the reader can derive from them but a small portion of the interest that we did, he will be repaid for whatever he may find unprofitable in these pages. Of the moral effect of the monuments themselves, standing as they do in the depths of a tropical forest, silent and solemn, strange in design, excellent in sculpture, rich in ornament, different from the works of any other people, their uses and purposes, their whole history so entirely unknown, with hieroglyphics explaining all, but perfectly unintelligible, we do not pretend to convey any idea. Often the imagination was pained in gazing at them. The tone which pervades the ruins is that of deep solemnity. An imaginative mind might be infected with superstitious feelings. From constantly calling them by that name in our intercourse with the Indians, we regarded these solemn memorials as idols, deified kings and heroes, object of adoration and ceremonial worship. We did not find on either the monuments or sculptured fragments any delineations of human, or, in fact, any other kind of sacrifice, but had no doubt that the large sculptured stone invariably found before each idol was employed as a sacrificial altar. The form of sculpture most frequently met was a death's head, sometimes a principal ornament, and sometimes only accessory, whole rows of them on the outer wall, adding gloom to the mystery of the place, keeping before the eyes of the living death and the grave, presenting the idea of a holy city, the Mecca or Jerusalem of an unknown people. In regard to the age of this desolate city, we shall not at present offer any conjecture, although it can hardly be doubted that its history is graven on its monuments. No Champollion has yet brought to them the energies of his inquiring mind. Who shall read them? Chaos of ruins. Who shall trace the void? O'er the dim fragments cast a lunar light, and say, here was, or is, where all was doubly NGHD. In conclusion, it may be remarked that if this be the place referred to by the Spanish historian as conquered by Hernandez de Chavez, at that time its broken monuments, terraces, pyramidal structures, portals, walls, and sculptured figures were entire, and all were painted. The Spanish soldiers must have gazed at them with astonishment and wonder, and it seems strange that a European army could have entered it without spreading its fame through official reports of generals and exaggerated stories of soldiers. At least no European army could enter such a city now without this result following, but the silence of the Spaniards may be accounted for by the fact that these conquerors of America were illiterate and ignorant adventurers, eager in pursuit of gold and blind to everything else. Or, if reports were made, the Spanish government, with a jealous policy observed down to the last moment of her dominion, suppressed everything that might attract the attention of rival nations to her American possessions,